I think this is true about every kind of change, that if you are to like love your life as it is, that means that when your life changes, even if you end up loving what it changes into, you've lost something.
And you might still grieve that.
If you've lost it, I think there's like grief and bittersweetness to every transition, to the degree that you love the way things were. I think that there is grief to growing up. I think there's grief to your kids growing up. I think there's grief to your best friend growing into herself. Because now, you know, you could be so happy for her. It's just that it's not only grief. You can also feel more love, happiness, joy. It's just that the grief is also there.
Yeah.
And if we don't like ever let that, this is like hugely repressed. And if we can't ever feel that, it gets like all clogged up inside. And at some point it feels like people start resisting change and start resisting love. Because it's like they get all stuck with it. It's taking up space.
Yeah. And so how do you grieve your friend coming into herself? How do you let that out? Or what would you say is a conducive way to deal with that?
So my like current working theory is grief is like a wave. It comes, there's usually crying. I might need to be held, just held while I sob or something like that. That's like classic grief presentation. But sometimes it's like stopped. It's like held back. What I'm playing with now is this idea that what you need to do to get it moving is to let that love get expressed, right? Like, what is it that you loved about the way things were?
And you would say that to yourself or to someone who can hold the space with you?
Yeah, it's like, so there's like, grief is like the painful part of the like stoppedness, but that means there's always something under here of some sort of like love of like that person or that circumstance or the way things were, that I'm like sad about it not being that way anymore. It looks like naming it, feeling it, letting it. At this point, I also don't have like a lot of the resistance to grief. I'm like, oh, here it is. Like, let me cry, you know? So this is like on the other side of the grief wave, right? The beginning of the grief wave, I find for a lot of people, it feels like tension like here or behind the eyes or in the throat or like heaviness in the chest. But that's like the holding back part. Like that's the avoiding the part of letting it come up and letting it go. And so if you can let it come up and there's probably sobbing or crying or some sort of expression, there might be all sorts of stuff under there. You could get mad at some point. Like it's all part of it. Yeah. But on the other side of it, I always feel that there's like this big, like energetic, expansive, vivid, like very alive feeling of expansiveness that comes on the other side of any wave of grief. That these days to me, it feels like the nature of these two things of like grief and love, like their relationship to each other, or also like death and like creation, it becomes like obvious, the relationship between those things somehow. Oh, there it is. There's the spaciousness that was just created for more love.